There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped in 10th and Ranch Michael by there.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, 27-year veteran out of Manhattan North Homicide Squad. Back in New York, folks, I had to, not that I missed the cold weather, but I'm back in New York for a couple of weeks. And as you can see, I'm in my New York studio now. Some things, some new things happening, some not so new things happening in the Idaho quadruple case. I just wanted to address some of the things we've been talking about from the very beginning. How we felt here at Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories is that science is going to solve this case. And we still believe that the DNA and fingerprints and the physical evidence that's left at that scene, which we've been kept largely in the dark about, which is okay because the police need to keep certain things a secret. And absolutely, the forensic evidence and the results of the forensic evidence are some of those things that they really need to keep secret, whether they have a profile. I spoke last week to Barbara Butcher, who is a retired chief of staff of the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, absolutely a DNA expert, and Ed Wallace, one of the premier crime scene, CSI crime scene detectives, probably in the world, teaches crime scene techniques all over the world. And I put a question to them when I was on duty, Ron's show. What do you think the possibilities are that the killer in this case left his DNA? And they basically said there's a 99% chance that the killer left his DNA at this scene. So is it that the DNA has been recovered, but yet has yet to be identified? I think that is the most distinctive possibility. We've had FBI profilers, we have behavioral analysts, we've had talking heads from every type of discipline that could be on this case. But the physical evidence, the scientific evidence is going to identify the perpetrator in this case. Now, there are new sciences dealing with DNA, and I'm going to get to that in a second. I'm going to actually play a clip of one of the premier genetic genealogists in the world who was on Cuomo last night. So her name is CeCe Moore. And I've been basically, since this case has been lasting longer than probably we all previously thought it would, this is, it's now, what do we got? 47 days, this case. It occurred on November 13th. It's now December 30th. So we're all expecting results much quicker than we got them. However, again, this case is obviously much more difficult than any of us realized earlier on. So with that said, I want to play a little clip from yesterday's show with Chris Cuomo, who brought on world famous genealogist CeCe Moore, who solved an unbelievable amount of cases. And with her is Jennifer Koffendorfer, a retired FBI agent. Let's play a little bit of this and see what Chris Cuomo has to say here.
So the Moscow, Idaho police chief just said that they have collected with high confidence all the DNA evidence at the scene. So now the question is, what do they do with it? Let's bring in CeCe Moore, whose groundbreaking DNA techniques solved 250 criminal cases, including the infamous Golden State Killer. You can see there's a documentary on it. I think it's on Netflix. Also with us is former FBI agent Jennifer Koffendorfer. First, Thank you both so much for in this holiday week coming on with me. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Double thank you to you, Coffin Daffer. One, because you have one of the best names in the business. And second, because you've been on multiple times. So, Cece, let me start with you. Let's get rid of this law and order stigma that like, oh, well, they got the DNA. That's it. We go to commercial break and when we come back, they've got the killer. How does it work with what they do with DNA and the different avenues of application in your experience?
Well, in a very violent crime scene like this, there's almost always going to be DNA left behind, unless he's wearing some sort of Dexter uniform, which is unlikely. And so that has to be very carefully protected and collected and then sent to the crime lab. What they'll first do is they'll run what's called an STR profile, which is 20 genetic markers, and that is the court admissible genetic evidence. They will then compare that against law enforcement databases looking for somebody who has been convicted or at least arrested of a violent crime in the past. Now, most violent criminals are going to be in the system because, of course, they have been caught doing something like that before. But there are a lot of cold cases in our country where they didn't get that match. That person was able to stay under law enforcement's radar for whatever reason. And so that means that you have to turn to more advanced technology. We're now using investigative genetic genealogy, which looks at a different type of genetic profile. Instead of looking at those 20 STR genetic markers, instead we look at almost 1 million genetic markers called SNPs, SNPs. And with those, we can use genetic genealogy databases, two that are called Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch that have agreed to work with law enforcement. And we can broaden out looking for relatives, usually distant cousins of that unknown perpetrator. And we can reverse engineer his or her family tree from their common ancestors.
So, Coffin Daffer, let me ask you this. On the straight legwork side,
I find it incredible that what she just said is amazing, just unbelievably amazing. And he dismissed it and went to FBI agent Coffindaffer. She just told you what this science can do. And you said, as an introducer, because she solved over 250 high-profile murders. How do you dismiss that after what she just said and go away from her? No follow-up question? I mean, she spoke about STR, which stands for, there's 20 markers in STR, the DNA technology, and it stands for short tandem repeats. But then she started talking about something called SMPS, they call it SNAPs, and then how it can do family and genetic matches. I think that's what this case needs, because we suggested, look, I repeat this almost every show. Obviously, I believe they have unidentified DNA that belongs to the perpetrator. However, if the perpetrator in this case is not in CODIS, which stands for Combined DNA Index System, which is run by the FBI, there's two types of, or two categories of DNA in that. One is offender DNA that is taken from arrestees of felonies and certain misdemeanors, and the forensic DNA, that is unidentified DNA that is in the CODIS system. This would expand the search to millions of people. That is why Phil and I and many other people in the know that are content creators on YouTube, we suggested they take DNA swabs from every single person that they interview. Of course, voluntarily. They can't make the person give it, but that would create a database. This DNA belonging to the murderer could match to a family member, and that's enough for these genetic genealogists to start digging to the different sites that they go on, family, DNA match, all of that stuff. So I don't know how he asked those questions and then just dismissed it. And it goes to Jennifer Coffindaffer. Let's play a little more of this.
So they say, well, now we're going to go in there. We're going to clean up this site now because we went through it. Why? What's the rush? What's the rush? You know what I mean?
Well,
Why do you have to clean up the scene? Because they got to rent it to somebody else?
no, Chris, at this point, they are very confident that they have done a full-scale evaluation of the evidence, that they've collected it, and they've sent it off to the lab. So at this point, there is no reason to not clean up. The evidence is collected. There's no more to collect. They're not going back to collect it. And so from a boots on the ground, this is time to move on from that crime scene because they are so confident.
All right. And the DNA is obviously, it has a big romantic attachment to it for us because it's used so much in storytelling that we see about this. But is it fair to say, Cece, that if it was someone in the database, is certainly the authorities would know it by now? And if Coffin Daffer's right, and a lot of other people we have who say that the FBI has a heavy hand in this investigation, they know how to process, they know how to process that very well. We would have known more by now, wouldn't we, Cece?
Well, they certainly would. They have to build that case, though. So it's possible they know a lot more than they are revealing. It's probable that they do. But I would think in a case like this, we would have seen an arrest quite quickly if they had gotten that match in their law enforcement databases.
Hey, thank you for watching. Please go to News Nation.
So, folks, there you heard it. I wish he would have pursued this interview a little bit more, because the DNA that they collected, if it's, again, unidentified DNA, and let's say that the DNA was collected from an unidentified blood source, which was commingled with the victim's blood, which would tell the investigators this is probably the perpetrator's blood. What else could we tell through that DNA profile other than it's not identified? What else could we tell about the perpetrator? Could we tell that he's a male white? Could we tell hair color? Could we tell height, weight, where his family was from? They have markers that will tell that the family is from Europe and those type of things. So it would tell us a great deal of things that could really help in this investigation. I don't know why he didn't pursue that in this interview. Cece Moore is a brilliant woman, and this is a relatively new science, but it's fascinating. And it's a science that I don't even think that law enforcement has really caught up with. In essence, law enforcement is using people outside of law enforcement to do these investigations, to do these genealogical, even the word's hard to say, these genealogical tests that could include millions of people. So I don't know why that they're not right on this. Let's do it right now. One of the things that everyone's getting excited about, of course, is the fact that that they cleaned up the crime scene. If law enforcement releases the crime scene and say they're through with it, they don't need it any longer, they've gotten all the evidence from that crime scene that they possibly can, and they're going to release it, I guess we as the public have to respect that decision. And he also made light of that. Well, I think there's someone that owns that building that behind the scene is putting a lot of pressure on law enforcement to release his house, So we don't really care about that, because what we care about is that there were 4 young people murdered at this crime scene. And that house, it's almost like when something horrific happens at a location, we want to wipe that memory from our memory banks. How many people would want that building just knocked down, never to be used again? But there is someone that owns that building. In some of these cases, that's what they do. They never want the building inhabited again. It's got bad karma, basically, that someone was killed, or multiple, in the Connecticut shooting of those 16 5-year-olds. They knocked that building down, never to be used again. You couldn't imagine them ever having like a nursery school at that location again. Sandy Hook. They knocked that building down, you know. I guess it gives a horrific aura to it. But in this case, you know, people are upset that why did law enforcement release the crime scene? Well, they released it. Whether we agree with it, whether we feel good about it, whether we feel bad about it, they made the decision to release it. Another thing is that everyone is sort of harping upon right now and wondering if this could be the reason that the house was targeted was that that party that was at the location in September. And I want to play a little bit of an interview from News Nation in regards to this and just see what some experts have to say about this.
If it had been busy in the past, that would actually be counterintuitive. Of people who commit these sorts of crimes, who plan them, who plot them, they stalk, they might case the joint, but they don't want surprises. They don't want crowds. They don't want a busy house. So I think that the fact that there wasn't anything going on in the house that night at all, and again, we don't even know, the killer could have been inside the house when the people came home hiding. I don't think it's related at all that it was a party house. I think it just gives us a lot of insight into the residents of that house and the kind of house that it was.
All right, makes sense. So Robin, police are saying they believe someone is out there with information or a picture from that night that will turn out to be the missing piece that cracks this case. So how do we interpret that request?
I like the word they used, someone. Someone means it's very specific, yet not being very specific towards an individual. In other words, I don't think they actually have a specific individual in mind. If they did, they'd already be in contact and interviewing them. The word someone triggers everyone who might have something to dig a little deeper. And what they're really trying to do is they're equipping the general population with knowledge of how to be present and really be change experts. Because if we have confirmation bias or we're looking for a killer, you might miss everything else that might be relevant. So they're trying to help the public really dig deep and think to themselves, what looks different? What did I see different? What do I have that might be different? And that's what they want people to bring forward.
Okay.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And don't forget to put the...
You know, folks, many people have asked, do I think that they have a suspect right now? Do I think that they have a suspect now, and are they waiting to build a case? Lynn S. Mesa, I'll put your question. Lynn S. Mesa says, Bill, in your opinion, does law enforcement have a suspect, and are they waiting for prosecutorial evidence, or they don't have anyone in particular? Great question, Lynn, and what I would say is I don't believe they have a suspect. I believe they have an unidentified DNA profile. I absolutely believe that, but that's not a named suspect, right? Are they on the right track? I can't even say that. They're still reaching out to the public for tips. They're reaching out to the public for more information. If there's something you remember. So to me, that's a sign of, I believe they may not have a great deal on this case. I think they're still trying to get that smoking gun piece of evidence that we talk about. And I think that, you know, when we talk about, there's so many things that I'm not clear about. The other night, Dr. Michael Baden, who years ago, he's old, who years ago was the chief medical examiner of New York City. He said that, he thinks, unless he has inside information, that the girls on the third floor were killed first. And then Ethan and Zaina were killed second on the second floor. I was always presented, and with absolutely no facts because it wasn't reported by the police. But because the second floor, the sliding glass doors were always unlocked, and it opened to the backyard, which would give the person cover that Ethan and Zaina were killed first. But Dr. Bodden said, no, they were the girls on the third floor, Madison and Kaylee, were killed first. I don't know if he has inside information, but that was the first time I was hearing that. And then, of course, everyone in the chat goes, oh, no, it's never been told to us by anyone that's in the know. No investigators told us that. The police didn't tell us that. The talking heads have told us that. And all we can go upon is the information that we receive from the police press conferences, which they've never released that. All the information we also got on like the wounds and things like that was from was from talking heads, not the police. So again, we don't know specifically what was the order. Judy B, Sergeant Bill, maybe CC Moore. I'm way ahead of you, Judy. I don't have her, and if anyone has her personal email, I would love to get it. I contacted her on Twitter. I contacted her on a generic email. I would love to have her on the show. I think I'd ask her a lot more questions than she was asked last night. It's fascinating. She is at the ground floor of a fascinating science that not too many people know about. Look, when law enforcement hasn't asked, or as far as I know, hasn't have, for example, the FBI, do they have trained FBI genealogists? If they do, I'm unaware of it. Does the NYPD, the larger police departments, have trained genealogists? No, they farm it out to civilians because it's a new science. Down the road, will all law enforcement, larger departments, and the FBI have trained genealogists? You bet. You bet they will. But right now, it's a new science. That's why I think that we really need to bring that in. Let's bring genealogy into this case, because I think 100% it could help a great deal. It may even be the smoking gun evidence that we talk about that solves this case. I'm going to play a little bit more about the answers to the September noise violation that some people are predicting could be the reason for these murders.
To our true crime panel, Casey Jordan is a criminologist and investigative profiler. Rodney DeMarie is a retired Louisiana homicide detective and host of the series Murder Chose Me. Robin Drake is a retired FBI special agent and head of the Counterintelligence Behavioral Analysis Program. So I'm going to pose this first question to the panel. When you see this body cam footage and these girls interacting with police, is there anything that jumps out at you as significant that an untrained eye may miss?
I'll jump in. Okay. Well, for starters, the girls know the drill. This is the third. We see 3 different videos, chest cam videos, of police visiting this particular residence for noise complaints within a week, twice in one night. They know the drill. They are compliant but dismissive. They know they're not getting tickets. The music keeps happening. What stands out to me is that I'm pretty sure Maddie is in the house the night September 2nd. And she came to the window and you can see her. And I'm pretty sure that that was her on the outside of the porch, going inside perhaps with her boyfriend. So the fact that they're lying and covering up isn't surprising. This is what kids do in college when they get caught doing things. But it shows to me that they're a cohesive group. They will cover for each other. They're tight. They send people outside. They close the door behind them. They know the drill. But it also means that they will cover for each other. And it shows a bit of friendship, I think, that goes on between them. But keep in mind, I think Maddie was in the house the entire time that she was on the phone with the police.
So, Rodney, I'll just dig into that a little bit more. When police go back and review that footage now, what are they specifically looking for?
I think there's revisiting the crime scene. I think probably most importantly, they're looking to see if anything's changed or anybody's tried to access the crime scene. and see if the killer possibly returned.
And Robin, do you believe law enforcement have identified and interviewed some of the other people in the body cam footage?
You know, one of the things that I just want to say here, every single person that's identified in that video, of course, should be interviewed. And as I said further at the very beginning, a DNA sample taken from them and a major case prints. Again, they can refuse those things. I'm not suggesting it's done forcibly. There is no way to do it forcibly. If they deny the police a DNA exemplar, then that's what they do. But they're identified, they're interviewed, because we suggested earlier on too, from Police Off the Cuff here, that they collect as much elimination DNA and elimination fingerprints, because this was the numero uno party house, it seemed. So there's going to be lots of DNA in this house. Let's continue this interview.
Who were at the home that evening?
Inevitably, yeah. And the thing that really struck me about this also was these law enforcement professionals, they did a great job. They are developing, and they obviously have a really tight relationship with the community itself, because two great motivations of all human beings is fear and trust. And they're doing all they can to inspire trust by making it easy for these individuals to communicate with them effectively. They're not threatening them. They're giving them warnings. And so I think that's really good for them and the rest of the community to see that. And when it comes to interviewing people, yeah, I was in New York during 9/11 with the FBI, and we interviewed absolutely everyone. I had lead number 2 on that investigation of person saw plane flying down the Hudson, and we interviewed that person too. So yeah, I believe they're interviewing everyone. They're triaging it, and they're based on the intelligence they have coming in, and they're prioritizing. But yeah, absolutely.
All right. So Casey, we've talked about this being a party house, but a video is worth 1,000 words, of course. Do you believe the busy nature of the home is one of the reasons the killer may have targeted it?
I'm not at all convinced that the killer ever was at that home before that night. And we don't seem to think that it was busy on the night that the murders happened. Remember, the 2 roommates who were unharmed got home at about 1 a.m.
You know, folks, I just wanted to add something in here. You know, many people in the real crime, true crime community, even some Phil and I think Duty Ron had even mentioned that, could this be the motive for the murders? I personally feel that that would be a stretch, that, you know, people were just basically angry about the party nature and the noise and the traffic going to and from this house. But I would find that to be that would be the reason someone would murder 4 people at knife point when they were sleeping. I don't know. I find that, you know, look, people have been murdered in the past for lesser things, but I would find that somewhat hard to believe.
Then I believe Xana and her boyfriend came home at about 1:20, and of course Maddie and Kaylee home at 1:45. So if it had been busy in the past, that would actually be counterintuitive. Of people who commit these sorts of crimes, who plan them, who plot them, they stalk, they might case the joint. They don't want crowds. They don't want a busy house. So I think that the fact that there wasn't anything going on in the house that night at all, and again, we don't even know, the killer could have been inside the house when the people came home hiding. I don't think it's related at all that it was a party house. I think it just gives us a lot of insight into the residents of that house and the kind of house that it was.
All right, makes sense. So Robin, police are saying they believe someone is out there with information or a picture from that night that will turn out to be the missing piece that cracks this case. So how do we interpret that request?
I like the word they used, someone. Someone means it's very specific, yet not being very specific towards an individual. In other words, I don't think they actually have a specific individual in mind. If they did, they'd already be in contact and interviewing them. The word someone triggers everyone who might have something to dig a little deeper. And what they're really trying to do is they're equipping the general population with knowledge of how to be present and really be change experts. Because if we have confirmation bias or we're looking for a killer, you might miss everything else that might be relevant. So they're trying to help the public really dig deep and think to themselves, what looks different? What did I see different? What do I have that might be different? And that's what they want people to bring forward.
Okay. Well, Rodney, we have some video of the Idaho State Forensics team at the crime scene from earlier on in this case that's resurfaced online. If you don't mind taking a look at it, we were going to play it. And from this video, can you tell us the work that was being done here? You could kind of see those investigators through the window there and some swabbing that's happening in one of the main rooms.
Well, from this angle, it looks like that was a fingerprint brush. And they're probably dusting for any prints that may have been there. It's also possible that there be swabs for different sorts of maybe some DNA cells that are possible. If you notice the one investigator that's looking towards the ground, is probably looking for droplets of blood or something of the sort.
All right. And that's what we had interpreted. We wanted your professional opinion on that. So thank you for that. We'll wrap up with this last question, Casey. You know, we have about 30 seconds, but are there fears now, day 45, that this case may go cold?
Oh, I mean, it's cooling. It's cooling on a daily basis. I mean, you know, first 48 is ideal, but within a week or two, we have had nothing in 45 days other than look for a white Hyundai Elantra, but it's not the car that you see in all the chest cam footage. I agree with Robin. This idea that someone knows, put the word someone out there. This is casting a wide net. They are desperate for leads because I believe they really have nothing. Yeah, there could be some stuff they hold back, but at this point, it's cooling really fast. If we don't get some information soon to make them think that they have a person of interest, people will lose interest. I do think that they'll catch this killer eventually, but probably because he does this again, and then it links back to this crime, not because the investigators find him.
Oh, sir.
Wow, that's a strong opinion. I sort of agree with her. I think they're not close to making an arrest. I think they have evidence that could really identify this perpetrator. Physical evidence. We spoke that that science is going to be what solves this case. Cheryl and Schaffner, no type of biological fluid or tissue is consistently more revealing about the victim, the attacker, and the circumstances of the assault than blood. Yeah, well, Sherilyn, absolutely. And we all know that DNA is contained in blood. And if they have the perpetrator's blood, which is a distinct possibility. You heard CeCe Moore, and I thought was the most, the most realistic and the most scientific. She said, look, unless this killer wore like, a Tyvek suit, she didn't use that language. She used some other language and covered his whole body up. He left DNA. So there you have it again. CeCe Moore, a genetic genealogist, an expert at that. She insists he left DNA. Barbara Butcher, retired medical legal investigator from and the chief of staff of the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. She said 99% chance the killer left DNA. Ed Wallace, one of the best crime scene detectives in the world, said, yeah, 99% chance. So there's DNA that's unidentified. However, through that DNA, we can tell a lot of things. We can tell the perpetrator's race. We can tell his sex, his hair color, potentially his eyes color. So there's a lot of things we can where his ancestors are from. So that's why I'm calling for bring in CeCe Moore, bring in the genetic genealogists, because they could help solve this case. They really could. It's unbelievable. But at this point, you got to pull as Phil says, the trick bag. You got to pull out every single trick you have and use it, and use those tricks to help solve this case. Because as time ticks on, it gets more and more difficult to solve. And you heard them ask, oh, is this a cold case? And the professor on the show we just watched said, it's cooling. It's cooling. And I don't think it's a cold case right now. And to me, it'll be a cold case when they start pulling back resources from it. And all of a sudden you see half of the FBI agents that are working on this case disappear. When you see half of the state police investigators disappear, that's when this case will get cold. But right now, I think it's still on the front burner, and it needs to be on the front burner. How about the car? remember we're talking about that Hyundai Elantra. Is that still in the forefront? I just heard something this morning that there was I forget the number of it. There was, I don't want to throw out a number, but there was a significant amount of white Hyundai Elantras registered with the university that actually students and people that perhaps work at the university owned. Of course, they all have to be vetted and searched, and the persons that own them brought in and interviewed. One of the things that we spoke about also in this case is the sheer amount of volume of tips. That in itself, I think Chief Fry mentioned, we have FBI agents all across the country, because they're probably having people that work in other jurisdictions field these tips because an investigation can collapse under its own weight. It's too heavy. They're getting too many tips, most of them which are not meaningful. But you still want people to call in and to tell you and give you information, because that one tip could be that smoking gun of information that you need to move on with this case. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime stories from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. We try to give and report on the facts of the case. We educate, we use our knowledge and experience as NYPD investigators. Myself, I was a sergeant, 22 of my 27 years on the job, and 16 of that I was in the NYPD Detective Bureau as a boss, and I in a really busy detective squad, the 2-3 in Spanish Harlem. And then I went from there to Manhattan North Homicide Squad, one of the premier homicide squads in the world. And we learned a great deal there. We had a lot of work there, of course. We got a lot of experience working murders. Someone put in the chat that, and I wish I had saved it, but that there was an article about the best real crime podcast on the internet, and we were voted as one of the best ones. I appreciate that. I wish if you could send me the link to that article, I would love to read it. I love to read good things about myself, give myself a big head. No, it's always good to know that you're doing a good job. So folks, so much has been said about this case. And I don't think when Chief Fry talks and says that an individual or someone has information. Yeah. I mean, what other words is he going to use? I don't think he's specifically saying there's one person. And that's the way some are interpreting this as, one person. Yeah, one person does. The killer is one. And maybe in this case, is there a chance that the killer told someone what he did? Is there? I think there is, but unlikely, it's unlikely. Kaylee Direct, I think allegedly there's a press conference today. I don't know. They've been doing press conferences just to basically check the box so that they're more transparent and telling the community what to do. I don't think the press conference means, if they tell you what they told us in the last press conference, it was a big nothing. They told us really basically nothing in the last press conference. So when they call a press conference, I don't take that much to it because, again, as I said, they haven't told us much in the previous press conferences. I want to play this. They're talking about, the killer still being on the loose. Just imagine the college community and the University of Idaho, which is such a huge part of this community. How do they even recruit students in this environment while this is going on? Very difficult.
Worked for the FBI Behavior Analysis Unit. She is with us live now. Thank you for giving us some time on this case. There is so much curiosity. There's so much focus on this investigation. I want to talk to you a little bit about the killer because that's your background. It's been your experience. It's a sick thing that happened here, and it's a sick person who did it. But compiling a profile of this person based on the evidence, based on what police know, how do you do that? Where do you start?
Well, the first thing that you have to do is pull together all the information. That means you look at the forensic results, the lab results, you look at crime scene photographs, you review all the investigative reports, and it's through the analysis of blending all that together that gives you the information about how well planned it was or not well planned. It gives you an idea of post-offense behavior, which right now is of critical importance. It also gives you information about the offender's personality. So, for example, if this offender went in at that time of the morning in a house that was occupied by at least 6 people, I mean, that's a very high-risk behavior, and a high-risk personality is not just going to be high risk in the middle of a homicide. They're going to be high risk in other things that they do outside of this homicide. So I think as much as law enforcement can give the public bits and pieces of this offender's personality, the more likely that they will be able to identify a possible suspect.
What does it tell you, Mary Ellen, that the person who did this, or even about the crime that was committed, that the 2 people in the home that did survive, that the killer did not go after them? What does that indicate?
Well, based just on public source information, what I would say is that there was someone or multiple people in that house that were the focus of the offender. And that can be borne out in terms of what the injury pattern was to these victims. So if you have 1 or 2 victims whose injuries are much more severe and or different from the other victims, and then you still have the 2 surviving victims, that would tell me that once the offender got to the victims that they wanted to focus on, that they were able to complete the crime and then exit the house. So it becomes a matter of who really was the focus of the attack.
And police have not said yet, but it is scary to think that whoever did this is out there living their...
You know, folks, other profilers, there was this other profiler who was on Ashley Banfield, and his name was McCrary was his last name. Let's see if I can pull him up. And he sort of said the opposite of what is being said, that don't speak in totalities, don't speak in absolutes. And I'm going to play what he said, because I really respect this guy and really agreed with what he said, because I think it's too easy to come up with an absolute theory when there's not a lot of absolutes in this type of business. Let me play him right now.
They're significant, and I wonder how a mind like yours would process them. The fact that one of these girls had far worse injuries than the other, and yet was sleeping in a room that wasn't hers in the middle of the night when these murders happened. What do you make of that?
Excuse me. We have to be careful that we don't overinterpret the information. And one hypothesis is that she was targeted. Perhaps that may explain the number of wounds that are excessive in her. But I've had other cases where I've worked with multiple murders where one victim has been subjected to the most violence, and turns out that wasn't a targeted victim. It was the person who had put up the most resistance.
Did you hear that, folks? So he sort of went against what a lot of the other profilers are saying. It's not that this person was specifically targeted, but that potentially this person resisted the most, put up the most resistance to the killer, which resulted in the killer stabbing this victim more violently than he did the other. So it's not necessarily that the person was targeted. I just wanted to make that point.
And enraged the killer, so the killer inflicted more wounds on that person, even though that person wasn't specifically targeted. So we could be dealing with anything like that. So it's important not to get tunnel vision on a given hypothesis. Important to have multiple competing hypotheses, and then let the evidence sort that out and support one and maybe dismiss the other. So I have to be a little bit careful with that.
And, so often we've heard, from the police, from the coroner, multiple reports that the kids were killed while they were sleeping. But then we hear about defensive wounds as well. And then there is this unusual aspect of 2 additional kids being killed, or maybe 3 additional kids being killed if 1 or 2 were the targets. I'd love to get your thoughts on all of that piece that means, like, what kind of person would take a knife, not a gun that's impersonal, a personal knife, a difficult physical endeavor in the middle of the night, and take out 4 people as opposed to the one or the person who put up the fight?
Yeah, a lot of rage, obviously, with this, and it's up close and personal. A knife stabbing, obviously, you have to get very close to the victim. And it's just a different mindset with that kind of a murder than it is. A firearm allows you distance from the victim. You don't have to interact.
We've spoken about this, of course, the up close and personal nature of using a knife. It's a horrific, violent way to kill somebody, and the potential also is there that the person you're stabbing is going to resist. They're going to try to save their own life. So when we talk about evidence and transfer of evidence, you're up close and personal. There is absolutely going to be transfer evidence. What does that mean, the word transfer? Well, blood from the victim is going to get on the perpetrator. Potentially blood, hairs, fibers from the perpetrator is going to get on the victim. That's what we talk about when we talk about transfer evidence. So evidence from this killer is absolutely 100% going to be left in that crime scene. And I don't know how more to say it. And that's why I think, as the evidence starts coming back, they have someone identified, maybe not by name, but they have a DNA profile identified without identifying whose DNA it is, if that makes sense to you guys. They have what I believe they have a DNA profile that belongs to the perpetrator.
With them necessarily up close. So it's an entirely different quality to that type of homicide altogether. Now, from the investigative point of view, and again, obviously, just let me say that I haven't seen the crime scene. I don't know. I'm not involved in the case, so I don't really have any inside information. But what you have to keep in mind, especially if there are defensive wounds or a lot of stabbing wounds, which there appear to be here, from an investigative point of view, that's very important because you have the likelihood of the offender's blood being at the scene. In other words, when someone commits a stabbing injury like this or stabbing murder with multiple stab wounds, there's a high probability they've cut themselves. The knife is in the strong hand. The weak hand is trying to control the victim. There's movement. And then the wound comes to the offender. He cuts himself either in the weak hand or with a lot of blood. It's very viscous, can slide down a knife blade, and he can cut his strong hand. But regardless of the mechanics of it, they have to process that scene very, very carefully because there's likely to be offender blood at the scene, which obviously the DNA will be a link. Now, another lead that would spiral off of that would be to go to the emergency room of the hospital or primary care facilities, whatever it might be in the area, and ask if anyone.
Folks, what he's talking about now, we spoke about this day one, is that they needed to do a hospital canvas or any kind of medical facility canvas to see if anyone came in seeking treatment for a knife wound. And that very much could be the perpetrator who cut himself during this quadruple murder. So we spoke about that, and this FBI profiler, Greg McGrary, he's right on it. He's right on everything. I like this guy the best of every single talking head I've heard in listening to this case.
Say in the days after this had come in, looking to get lacerations sutured up that maybe were on their hands or their arms. That would be something that investigators should pursue and take a look at. So those are just some thoughts.
Xana's mom, Kara Northington, obviously apoplectic over what's happened, and understandably so, but she did tell me exclusively on Friday night that she believes the person who did this knew the kids and that they knew the person and that it was someone they knew and trusted. I know it's difficult for a mom to process a lot of this, but does any of that resonate for you in terms of the rage that it would take to do this to 4 kids while they were sleeping?
Yes, I mean, it would take a lot of rage, a lot of anger. This is very, very violent, and multiple victims like this. So it could be someone that they knew. It could be someone that knew them, but they didn't know all that well. There's this phenomena of erotomania, where someone gets a fixation on a victim, and the victim doesn't really know that this fixation is in place. And then the erotomanic killer gets upset because they feel the victim is cheating on them because they go out with somebody else or whatever. And it's a delusional thing, and they go in and commit the murder. But again, we're struck with the unusual nature of this with multiple victims. But again, the crime scene is dynamic. A lot of it depends on victim-offender interaction and what happened, which I can't really talk to because I'm not familiar with the scene itself.
So listen, that the FBI has provided support in this crime. There are upwards of 50 people from the FBI helping. There are several behavioralists helping as well. But the Moscow police remain the lead agency on this case 3 weeks and a day later. This is a tiny little town. They haven't had a murder here for 7 years. And I'm curious, since you've been in the trenches with the FBI and you have landed on scenes like this before, not obviously exactly, but small towns with agencies that don't, do a lot more than parking tickets and some drunk tickets. When does it, or should it ever be turned over to another agency to take the helm, to turn to the states or turn to the FBI experts to take over the investigation?
Well, obviously you have legal jurisdictional issues.
The FBI is not going to take over the case. The Moscow police are going to be the lead agency in this because it's their jurisdiction. All right. When they make an arrest on this case, the prosecutor is going to be from Moscow community. And the FBI, their assistance is needed and wanted. Their resources is needed and wanted, as well as the Idaho State Police. This is a huge, huge case. I mean, this would be a huge case in New York City. It would be a huge case in Chicago, in Miami, in Baltimore. A quadruple murder at knife point. This would be a huge case, and resources are needed. And this, as I said, this guy, the profiler that we've just been watching, he is the most reasonable, the most knowledgeable. I think that I repeat myself sometimes, but that's what you do when you're a former teacher, is that you can't speak in absolutes. If we learn anything through investigation, is that there's nothing that's absolutely the truth. Nothing, you can't just say, oh, it's absolutely this, absolutely that. That's part of investigation. That's part of asking questions. That's part of vetting information, is asking questions and checking it out and verifying it, vetting it, see if it's the truth, see if maybe it's not true. Lacey Fontenot, this is the only profiler that I agree with. I found him to be the best, Lacey. I'll put you up on screen. This is the only profiler that I agree with. And one of the reasons he's so easy to like and so easy to agree with is that, again, he doesn't speak in absolutes. And that's one of the reasons very early on, I was like, this guy is the best. Folks, if you're looking for an attorney in the New York metropolitan area, Joe Murray is your man. He's a retired NYPD police officer and a defense attorney. You can reach him on his cell phone at 718-514-3855 or email him at joe@jmurray-law.com. His website is jmurray-law.com. He's a huge promoter of police off the cuff, and we really appreciate Joe. And if you're getting any trouble or a family member gets in trouble, there he is. He's your man. He's always out there. Folks, I can't ignore the fact that everyone in the chat is saying there's a press conference today by the Moscow police in regards to this case. I hope in that press conference they say they have an identified perp. I really hope and pray that. I don't think that's going to happen. Maybe there's other evidentiary information that is going to be like they're close to solving this case. I hope and pray that also. I don't know. A lot of the press conferences earlier on, they give new information on their website every day. So I'm hoping that, look, when you look at these beautiful kids, I'm hoping that they got information that is going to solve this case. I really do. It's just such a huge case. It's a case that we've been sort of, we've been sort of harping on the fact that there's no new information. They don't have a perpetrator. It's at this point, it's 47 days since this murder and no information. So again, I and everyone else that's following this case, the people that have been covering this case, we pray, we hope and pray that they're going to come up with some information today that's going to solve this case, that's going to give us all hope. Let me just play this.
Back, it has now been more than 6 weeks since 4 students were brutally stabbed to death at a home near the University of Idaho, but still no suspects, no motive, no arrests. Police say they're searching for a white Hyundai Elantra, but they're holding back almost all other information. And worse yet, maybe they don't have any. So what is the latest from Moscow, Idaho? Joining me now to discuss, co-host of In Pursuit on Investigation Discovery, Callahan Walsh returns. Welcome back, Callahan.
Hey, thanks, Kenny. Thanks for having me.
Is this investigation too big for the Moscow Police Department?
That's a great question, and it could be. I know they're trying to get help from other agencies, but this is a case that has stalled. We were going week after week with no arrests, with no suspects named. They're grasping for any information to help break this case wide open. And it just seems like they don't have any. And it's unfortunate because they haven't been sharing any information with the public either. The public can absolutely be law enforcement's force multiplier. They can help provide tips. They can help provide information that law enforcement could use to really, again, break this door wide open. And unfortunately, they haven't really been harnessing the power of the public. We'll see what happens with this investigation, but we need an arrest. We need answers as soon as possible.
Well, they need to do something because they've created this vacuum, which has been filled. You have pointed out that there have been TikTokers who get hundreds of thousands of views by singling out people in the community with no evidence and essentially ruining their lives. Tell me about the professor at University of Idaho who's pushing back because, he was named by amateur sleuths as an informal suspect.
Yeah, so it's so unfortunate that we have, these TikTokers out there who are making money off the backs of defaming other individuals, this university professor, off the backs of these murder victims who are putting out, psychic readings, these tarot card readings, and ousting people who have nothing to do with this investigation, nothing to do with the murders, defaming them, saying that they're the ones who committed them. It's unfortunate that we've gone to that level. I think part of it is because there hasn't been much information released, and these internet sleuths are reaching. They're looking for anything and creating their own narrative. It's unfortunate that's happening because it's taking away the real focus and the real attention on where we should be looking, on the people that we should be looking at.
Who should we
and
be
these
looking
innocent
at?
people are being caught in the crossfire.
Who are some of
Well,
the
I think
people?
they should be looking at.
Folks, as you can see, the people that are the most frustrated in this are the press. They're mad that they're not getting information that gives them great stories and great ratings, and they're so frustrated. You could see it not just on Fox, on every single channel, as they say, it's been 47 days and there's been no arrest, well, that sometimes happens in murder investigation. Not every case is solved in the first 48. We're spoiled by, by the police being so good in so many jurisdictions in this country that we come to expect excellence, expect arrests, expect cases like this. On Michael Baden's interview the other night, he said a statistic that was just incredible to most people, and that was that 50% of murders nationally go unsolved. I mean, most people would be like, oh my God, is that really true? Yeah, it happens to be true. Not every jurisdiction, as we see by following these cases throughout the country, not every jurisdiction has a police department like the big metropolitan areas that are trained well, that are experienced. So, and the nature of homicide, I'm not going to go into it, but many times it's these cases of shootings and stuff where it's involving the drug trade. There's no cooperation in these shootings. So those are a big percentage of a lot of the homicides across the country. And without cooperation and witnesses, you're not going to solve a case. Let me play the rest of this.
Yet any individual that's on the sex offender registry within, at least 20, 30, 40 miles of that home, anybody who's been convicted of a sexual assault anywhere in and around that campus or that home, those are the people that should be focusing on, and they should be harnessing the power of the public to make sure that they can fill in that knowledge and that information that the law enforcement might not have.
What have you heard from profilers in terms of the makeup of whoever perpetrated this? What kind of person would go into a house? Is it more likely that they knew these people because of the familiarity of the way they were slaughtered?
Right. Well, talking to profilers, I've heard a number of different opinions, but what many of them are saying is that something must have happened in the hours, days, weeks, or even months leading up to this, to where one of those individuals, and they don't know which one, but one of them was a target. This isn't likely a case where a random individual comes into a random home, commits a random crime, and is somehow able to get away scot-free without any shred of evidence. That's just not a likely scenario here. So there's something going on that I know law enforcement walked back saying that somebody was targeted, but look, there's a reason this crime occurred, and law enforcement needs to get down to the bottom of it. And that has to be looking at the steps leading up to this murder.
Yeah.
And that's not just the steps in that night. It's not just a few hours. Look back. Was anybody?
All right, folks, he's sort of repeating a lot of stuff that we already know. Let's hope and pray today. This press conference is huge, as some of you folks are saying in the chat, that this could be the great news that we want. But I don't know if that's a fact. We know there's a ton of evidence in this case. Could they potentially have someone identified? Yes. Have they let on that they have this information? No. So let's wait till the 1 o'clock press conference. We're going to keep covering this case. If this information at 1 o'clock is big, I'll go back on the air. I'll go back and report it. I just want to thank everyone. The Police Off the Cuff channel. Jennifer Plant, thank you so much for the $9.99 super sticker. Very much appreciated. I want to thank so many of you people. A lot of new faces, new names I see in our chat. Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories is growing every day, and I think people are starting to find out about us, and we appreciate all you guys that support us. And as I said, we're starting to grow rapidly, and it's so great. And it's great for me to see people in the chat whose names I don't know. That means the word's getting out there, and you guys have been following us. Foggy Morn, thank you so much for the $9.99 super sticker. So much appreciated. Folks, what we try to really focus on here is evidence and information that comes from reliable sources, the press. We don't deal in innuendo or making up things. There's been a lot of what ifs in this case. And even we covered some of those what ifs from these FBI behavioral analysts, profilers, which has become a favorite of people in the true crime community. But let's not forget that behavioral analysts, again, they do not speak in absolutes. What they speak about is the potentiality and the probability. And that's what we look at, the probability. I mean, we've spoken about, there's so many things that indicate that this was a premeditated attack. The killer knew the house. The killer brought this horrific knife to the scene, which shows an intention of using it, and did use it. So all of those things, you could be an amateur profiler and predict some of these things also. So Again, folks, if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring that bell. If you want to support us, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels. We also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels, and you can see the folks in the green font in our chat. There are supporters, there are YouTube channel members, and we totally appreciate them. Life is short. Your channel is growing finally. Well deserved. Thank you. Life is short. A lot of love being expressed in this channel, in the chat, and we appreciate it. Guys, again, I'm going to be watching the 1 o'clock press conference. If it's huge news, I'll come back on the air. I would expect, in fact, I would almost guarantee that Duty Ron's probably going to cover it live. So I would wait till he goes off the air because he's got a huge audience. So, but if it is really solid information, I'll come back on the air and we'll talk about what that means. Guys, thank you for tuning in today. Have a great day. And wow, it's December 30th. It's going to be New Year's Eve tomorrow. Happy New Year, everyone, and God bless.
One episode just ain't enough.